week 14. We are really in the home stretch. So you've got stories this week, next week, and then you have a take-home final exam that you'll have some time to work on. So this week we will do the next 3 stories. Next week there will be 3 stories, and then you get to do some thinking, mulling, and then it's over. So this week's stories, we have The Wife Who Spoke Japanese in Her Sleep by Vivian Plum. We have Pantomime of the Great Depression. It's actually a poem by Donald Justice. And The Spell and the Ever-Changing Moon by Roxana Ahmed. So let's kind of consider some questions for each of these just as a way to help you crack into the reading and maybe do some thinking about it in terms of real life applications. All right? At the beginning of The Wife Who Speaks Japanese in Her Sleep, we see that Honey's kind of just like, she's regular. You know, she wears her dressing gown around, she putters in the garden, she does things for her husband, and it seems like they're both fine with their lives. And then she develops this bizarre, unusual skill where she can speak another language in her sleep, and she becomes kind of famous and regarded as a clairvoyant or a psychic, and there's kind of a hustle that crops up around her, and as a result, Howard feels less and less comfortable in his relationship, and with her he feels not seen. He's not quite sure he likes the new Honey. He kind of misses the old Honey. The new Honey sure likes herself better, so she's got more confidence and she thinks she's something, and she's doing her hair, and she's got her sort of her entourage, you know, the translator, she's got the gardener, this kind of stuff. And then eventually Howard, well, he takes some interest in Miss Florica. He's caught in a little bit of a compromising position with her. But the bigger thing is, as a result of all the changes in Honey, he not only acts out that way, he actually just ends up leaving. And so this story just raises the idea, something you could think about in your own life or in the future as you watch people and couples. Naturally, people change. That's just, you know, life is kind of an evolution for all of us. We grow, we change, we experience new things. Sometimes we surprise ourselves, as is the case with Honey. And we head in different directions. And so there are ripple effects to that where you know, our relationships kind of feel the impact of our changes sometimes. And so, you know, we first experienced this when we're kids growing up with our parents, and the expectation, of course, when you're first a baby, then a toddler, then a preschooler, you know, of course, you're going to change always in your relationship with your parents. And so that doesn't necessarily always have such difficult effects. Although I have to say, like when you grow up, if you go away to college or when you move out of your parents' house, sometimes if you've had stretches then without seeing your parents and you felt yourself become more and more of an adult, there can be kind of some feelings when you go back and see your parents. If you try and stay at their house, or even if it's just for a family gathering, like you have become a new and different version of yourself, and they still remember you as who you were, say, when you were 16. So there can be some difficulties in those relationships, but I think often we do see it in marriages. You know, I really think sometimes about couples that are like high school sweethearts and they've known each other since they were even like 13 or 14, and then they get married after high school. And then as those decades go along, sometimes the couple grows together. So the ways that they're going to change are reliant and intertwined, so they grow together. But sometimes you see those couples divorcing because, you know, when you hit, let's say 30, 35, sometimes one member of the couple, you know, not just a new hobby, a new job, a new interest, or realizes, I just want to be someone who travels. We have some means now, so I want to take trips. And the other person in the couple's like, I actually just like to be at home. So sometimes there, you know, you realize that there's been a split in terms of who you are. And sometimes then, you know, in a situation like that, the couple might get counseling. So there's some attempts to manage the changes and manage the relationship so that it can continue. Realistically, more often than not, you're looking at ultimately a breakup. It can take years, it can take decades for the breakup to happen. But sometimes, you know, at least one person in that relationship thinks, I just don't want to be in it anymore. I want to leave. There's been too much change. And I mean, another example, I can even tell you, like in high school, I had my pack of friends, and we'd been friends since elementary school and then junior high, or what you called middle school. And then we got to high school, and by sophomore year or so, I realized that my closest friends didn't feel like home to me anymore. I realized like I had joined the speech team and I was kind of doing like some honors classes, and I realized I was heading into sort of more an academic and college bound direction. And my two best friends were more busier, sort of, getting drunk on the weekends. Mind you, I was no angel. Getting drunk on the weekends, and I mean, like my last memories with them, in terms of our friendship being tight and like familiar to me, we would go to the drive-in movies, get like really drunk, and then they'd head off with guys, and there'd be drama, and they'd just be wasted, and like someone would vomit in the back seat eventually, and we'd just call it Friday night. But there was something inside of me that felt like, I don't know how to accommodate this anymore. Like, I don't feel like I'm still the person who can continue in those behaviors even for 2 more years. So our friendship then kind of cooled. We kind of took steps away from each other. There was no big blowout, but I just started hanging out with different people. And they headed, one direction, I headed another. One of them, Susan, she was my first friend. We met when we were two. Susan then got married when she was 18, had her first kid at age 19. When I was sort of like in my freshman year of college thinking, like that was unthinkable. Like I have too much to do in life and the world before I settle down like that. And then as it turns out, that husband, her high school sweetheart, he was physically abusive. They had another kid, and it was just kind of like this slow motion disaster until they, for like 10 years until they finally divorced. And, so she'd been through all this life stuff. They'd been trying to manage that relationship. It was a relationship with her I had stopped managing some time before. I had left the relationship, and eventually she left the relationship with that husband, married another guy. That didn't work out either. Long story. But I just sort of think it's really interesting to consider how we do change in our lives, and then how that's kind of a domino effect into the relationships in our life. Okay, something for you to think about with regards to your own relationships. And if you ever have to make a conscious decision, like, am I done here? And next we have The Phantom of the Great Depression by Donald Justice. And it's a really specific poem because it is about the Great Depression, which lasted from about 1929 through 35, and well, actually beyond. So the 30s were tough in our country, and that still feels immediate enough for me because I'm old, and my mom and dad were both born in 1935. For you, I mean, depending on your age, I know we get, everyone has different backgrounds in our classes, but probably you're younger than I am, and you might have a grandparent or a great grandparent that you've heard stories about who lived through the Great Depression. But, I could always tell in the household when I was growing up, I could tell that my parents had been little kids and had grown up both in the Great Depression and then during World War II, just in terms of how careful they were about money and things. And no way would we throw away a plastic bag. You would wash it and reuse that thing forever. And of course, I'm still that way now, and I suspect many of us are. But I know that, like, my dad would want to buy like ground beef, like for hamburger, and he would go to one store. He would always have his little clutch of coupons too. And he would go to one store and see the price and think, no, I think if I drive across town, I'm going to find it for 18 cents cheaper per pound. So he would spend ultimately like 2 hours to get 1 pound of hamburger meat because he could save 18 cents. And I mean, you could make the argument like, was your time not worth more than the 18 cents? But so I also then am reminded of my dad's mom, so my paternal grandmother, Dorothy. And when she died, so she was born in 1912, I think. And so she very much was alive through World War One and then the Great Depression, World War Two. She lived through a lot of kind of seminal historical eras in United States history. And so she was kind of tough. She was kind of negative sometimes. But she she would pick those cherries off that cherry tree out back, and she would get some things canned. And if we came over, she would cook a goose. And I remember when she died and we were going through her things, I remember opening in her bedroom, opening the drawer where her underwear was. And there were only a few pairs, and they were so raggedy. And more than one pair, like the elastic waistband was held to the fabric with like a safety pin. Because she would just never throw away anything, even underwear that was literally dripping off her body, and held by pins. And I mean, I sort of was thinking, God, I wish we'd known, like, that, hey, there's a stocking stuffer, a new pack of Hanes for grandma. But I like, because it was such a hidden kind of thriftiness, we didn't know that this was, that she was living at this level of, I don't get anything new. I don't throw anything away. And then in the kitchen, and then also in the pantry where her washer and dryer were, and the cupboards above it, were all these empty, like, Cool Whip containers, the plastic containers. Now I know lots of people, like, you'll keep, an empty yogurt container and maybe use it as like a Tupperware or whatever. But she had hundreds of stacked Cool Whip containers. Like, it was like weird hoarding in a way, except then you realize, oh, like, she was born on a ranch in a dugout, in Montana in 1912. She lived through all those changes, like, like the radio became a thing. Cars became a thing during her lifetime. So huge changes. Plastic became a thing. And like, if you've lived in a world with no plastic and suddenly that development enters, you think, my life is so much easier. There's nothing as great as plastic. And I will never, throw that away because it's useful and I can reuse it. So I also have, just like, side note, I think often how my dad says, like, when he thinks of his mom's life, my dad would say that the number one thing that transformed her existence was the invention of the washing machine for clothes. Because she first, when she was young, had to do like the family's laundry, like literally like with a bucket of water and a board that she'd scrub against. And then when things got a little modernified, she got one of those wringer, you'd feed the piece of clothing through and wring it. Because it was so laborious to do laundry, I think there's kind of traditionally was a household schedule, not just for my grandma, but like kind of nationwide. Like, if you read some handbooks for housewifery in 120 years ago or whatever, like Monday was wash day. And I just remember my dad, his little kid memories of his mom were Monday being wash day and heating the water and wringing the stuff through. And he just remembers that moment when she got her first like electric washing machine and how it changed her forever. So the example of my grandma, the example of my parents, my memories of my parents, all tied to this idea of living kind of a Spartan life where you really value every single thing and you don't throw a single thing away and you don't have much, which is kind of like today's modern minimalist movement, isn't it? But anyhow, I just feel like there's a lot of that's packed into this poem by Donald Justice. And so for you, as someone who's now, several generations removed from the Great Depression and from some of those stories like I've just told, do you have anyone in your life? And if not, could you ask in your family for some stories about that? I mean, it might be worthy, if there's a family gathering, you might just kind of marshal up the courage and say, I'd like to ask about, great grandma Ethel and what was her life like, and ask the people who are still alive those stories. I don't think you'll regret it. Finally, we have The Spell on the Ever-Changing Moon, in which we see a battered woman, Nisa. We see, she's treated terribly in her life. She's a mother. Her husband's awful. And we see her turn to sort of a magician, Talat, for some help. And Talat suggests kind of a magical, that Nisa should put a drop of her menstrual blood and have her husband drink it, and blah, blah, blah. And you kind of realize that Talat's a manipulative charlatan who's really after the money. But anyhow, Nisa goes home and is like, no, no, cannot do these things. And her life continues to be terrible. And I mean, throughout the story, you just see Hamid, her husband, treat her awfully. And the neighbors kind of sort of live scandalized. And everyone wants something to change for her, but it seems undoable. And then at the end of the story, I know, listen, you guys, I know it's sappy and kind of like cliche, but like she realizes that all along the power to make change in her life was inside of herself. And so she packs things up and she takes the little skit and she leaves. She's going to her mom's house. She's had enough. And so the change that she needed did happen, but she had to make it happen for herself. So it's a story of empowerment, and it's also a story of the places we look for help. I mean, for some people, it's religion. You know, in the case of the story, it was this sort of mystical talat. And so I just think for all of us, it's worth stopping every now and then and thinking, like when I've had a problem and when I've been up against something in life and it hasn't gone well. Did you ever have one of those great life moments? I mean, cue the swelling violins here, but where you realized that the magic that you needed was inside of yourself all along. I suppose it's Dorothy at the end of The Wizard of Oz, clicking her heels together and just saying it's no place like home. It's that kind of feel to it, isn't it? But I think it is worthwhile because it's a way, if you do this stopping and thinking, where you can give some credit to yourself as being the agent of change within your own life. And so I would like you to always remember that the power is in you.